everyone. Sorry. Okay. Reset.
Okay.
We'll cut it. It's okay. Don't worry about it.
Okay.
Hi, Tree.
Okay. Got it. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our interregional podcast. If you don't already know, we are the Vietnamese Student Association at the University of Washington Bothell, aka VSAUWB. My name is Brandon Boom. My pronouns are he, him, his, and I am the Public Relations Officer for this academic year. And I'll be passing it off to Mindy.
Hi, my name is Mindy. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I'm the co-culture chair this year. I'll pass it to Lauren.
My name is Lauren. I go by she, her, hers, and I am the internal vice president for this year. And joining us today is Lexi Nguyen. So if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Hi guys, my name is Lexi Nguyen. I am a second year at UW Bothell, and I am pre-majoring in business with a concentration in marketing, and I go by she, her, and hers.
Great, thank you for joining us today, Lexi. And so the topic today is in regards to the recent rise in Asian American and Pacific Islander hate crimes. So this is going to be one of the more serious topics that we have on this podcast. So as a disclaimer, whatever we say here is just our opinions, and they don't reflect anything onto the club. They're purely our own opinions, and we are not claiming that we're experts about this topic. We're just having a conversation about a complex issue that is like much more than what we are able to discuss today. So we're all still learning more about this topic every day. Hopefully we're able to spread awareness of this issue through this session of this podcast. So the first question we have today is just anti-Asian crimes and the Stop Asian Hate wave are constantly being compared to the anti-Black crimes and the BLM movement. What do you think of? We should start with a different one.
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
One.
Oh,
No,
you're
it's
good.
Okay, well, here we go. Have you
Okay.
witnessed any examples of anti-Asian racism in the local Washington community?
Personally, I haven't, but I went through a small occurrence myself. This happened January of last year, and after I left an orchestra concert with my friend, there was a Black homeless man that came up to me. He's like, "Hey, you're Asian, you look like you have some money." And then right away I covered up my satchel purse with my hands, and then he started getting more verbally aggressive, and he started to say, "Oh, you chink, you gook," excuse my language. And then he was like, "Oh, you Asians think you're the because you're part of the model minority." And I was like, "I'm gonna leave." And so I literally skirted so fast to my car, and I was so scared. And at the same time, I was like, people still believe in this myth, this Asian model minority myth that has been perpetuated endlessly in society. And that's part of the reason why a lot of people have been more dismissive, in my opinion, about the Asian hate crimes than the Black Lives Matter movement, because they think, oh, Asians, they're the most privileged minority group, so therefore they're not affected by the amount of racism and the amount of physical violence in their community. So that's one of the biggest things that's so concerning, that causes a lot of dismissive attitudes towards the Asian hate crimes that have been going on.
Yeah, thanks for sharing your experience. I think that's horrible that happened to you and you had to experience that when you were just leaving with your friends. And that's something that you can't really control in a way. But I also want to validate, and I totally understand when you talk about how this model minority myth kind of shows up. And it's supposed we live in a society that's supposedly for equality and things, and yet these things still exist and so prevalent in our lives.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the model minority myth is such an interesting thing that exists, because you would think that it's oh yeah, they think so well of us, so highly of us, but it's really just a system, it's kind of a little thing that just enforces more systematic racism and just pits minorities against each other rather than bringing people together, which is so ridiculous. And it sometimes really infuriates me when I know it's not their fault, but like when older Asian people like don't understand it, they're like they play into the myth and they're like, yeah, you know, like we're better than like black people, we're better than Hispanic people, Latinx people, like all that stuff. And I'm like, no, we're not. We're not better. We are all equals, and like it's like you're playing into this and you don't even know it. They're just kind of victims themselves of the system.
Yeah, I agree. Like systems are built to make the perfect outcome that they're designed to create. So even as invisible as it is, it's still working to build its like perfect outcome.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and to add to your point, Mindy, I was going through my Twitter feed. I went through it like a month ago, and somebody from the Black community would say, yeah, you know what? We're not going to support the Asian hate crimes because the Asians, they didn't do shit for us. And I'm like, excuse me? You're going to say that? Like, I feel like that is low key a kind of a narcissistic and selfish way of thinking, just because why are you being biased towards your own culture, and you're saying my culture has been through so much more than yours, so we're not going to give a shit about yours. And that's just so wrong, you know? And like what Lauren and Mindy said about, you know, America, we're built on equality and we're built on, you know, embracing everyone's culture. But it's so concerning that in America that hasn't really been the case. The amount of, you know, Asian hate crimes that have been happening.
Yeah, and like kind of talking about like, you know, I guess like the BLM movement and like anti-blackness and stuff like that, like that's very wrong. Like it should not be like happening at all, right? Black Americans or just black people in general shouldn't have to feel like they're being attacked just for their skin color and like be afraid that like, you know, to live. And like I see really often on social media, like TikTok especially, for some reason, that like people are just pitting like races against each other. They're like, oh well, you know, like you said, Lexi, like, oh, like the Asian people didn't like help us out when we went like during BLM and like throughout the whole entire history. But I'm like, no, like it's not that. It's not, we're not playing the oppression Olympics. It's like we should all just support each other. Like personally, I have seen a lot of people on my social media feeds, like the Asian community, like support BLM and stuff like that. And like I've seen a lot of Black creators, a lot of Black people I know like support Asian, like anti-Asian hate crime, or yeah, not anti-Asian hate crimes, but being against that. Yeah, and I've seen a lot of that, and like that's what we should be trying to do rather than tear each other down. Like we're playing into like their whole entire plan, you know, like it shouldn't be like a we're more oppressed than you, or like you didn't help us so we're not helping you. Like we should be with each other. And I know there's like anti-blackness in the Asian community. Don't even like, we're not going to even ignore that problem. Like there is, it's so prevalent in our community, in our culture. It's ridiculous. But like I see a lot of young people trying to have that conversation with like their older like relatives, like their parents, their grandparents, their aunts and uncles. And like it takes a lot of courage and a lot of like effort and energy to have those conversations. And like I'm really happy that at least the younger generation is starting to you know, bring these topics up.
Yeah, I think in my experience, I am fortunate enough to well, to have my dad as my father, right? He grew up in a very diverse environment, right? He immigrated from Vietnam at a very young age, about like 6 or 7. He came over, he went to an elementary school in the Bay Area, and that school was actually mainly African American elementary kids. And there was only him and one other Asian kid there. He was Filipino. And so I feel like, I think my dad grew up with a lot of experience with African Americans and less so of like experience with Caucasians. And he grew up with experience in their culture, and even going later on, I think his last job, his prior occupation was a car mechanic, and he had a lot of experience, work experience with Hispanics as well. And my dad then was able to pick up Spanish, and I think that understanding the language also helps a lot with feeling connected to other people. And so I think that it's important that even though we speak like the same language, we may speak the same language like English, we also have to understand the cultures and the similarities there to feel more unity with one another.
Yeah, adding on to what Brandon said, there are even some people out there that if you're Asian or if you're part of this other minority group, and if you possess an accent but you can't speak English, you're not as American as us because you're not Westernized and you don't have Eurocentric features. So that's another problem that has been coming into play with Asian hate crimes. Yeah. So what do you guys think about that?
Yeah, I totally agree on the point that you just made, Lexi, about like languageism and how like English is the predominant language. It's not America's official language. We don't have an official language in America, and yet if you don't speak English like fluently with correct grammar, then you are like discriminated against. And I see this a lot with my mom, where she feels like she's like dumb, or she feels like she's just looked down upon because even though she can speak and people can understand her, there's still this like disparity where it's like she's not good enough. And so then she's been trying to take like English classes and like lessons, but it's something that our generation or our parents' generations had to deal with. And I just think that being a Vietnamese American, like having like these both worlds and being able to see that really changes my perspective on like the world. Yeah.
Yeah, like I totally agree with both your points. Like I remember recently actually, there was like a little incident where we just had to get our car towed, and so it was just me and my sister, and then my dad was at home, so I was like talking on the phone with him, and the tow truck guy came, and like my dad deals with all our car stuff. I'm not like super great with car stuff, and so I was like talking to my dad. I'm like, oh, do you want it towed home or like whatever? And like literally like the second that this guy stepped off of like his tow truck, he's like, oh, Asian, right? And I was like, yeah, I know, right? And I was like, yeah. It's just like me and my sister, who's like younger than me, and then like a police officer who's like a white male. And so like, even though I don't like, I don't agree with it, I was kind of glad that there was like a guy there and like a white police officer, because like I was kind of scared because this other guy was just like making comments about me and my sister being Asian. And like I was on the phone with my dad, and he's like, oh, like, do you want me to talk to your dad? But like, oh, Asian, right? Can he speak English? Like, do you need a translator? And I was like, oh no, like I was gonna say like, oh no, like we're fine. Because my dad, he immigrated here when he was in his like early teens. And so he's been in America for like I'll say like 40 to 50 years now. And like, yeah, 40 years. Yeah. And so like, obviously like he has a job here. He went to school here. Like he can speak English and he understands English. It's just not like super well. And so like, I was like, I'm gonna be like, oh yeah, like it's fine. But sometimes I translate for him anyways, just so I'm so sorry. So I can get so he just be like understand it like easier, right? And like before I can even say anything, like the police officer was like, oh no, their dad can speak English, he's fine. Like he you don't gotta say that. And I was like, thank you, because I feel like if I were to speak up, I would probably get looked down upon because I'm like a young Asian American woman. And like that's also something that I think is really interesting, because like I feel like my experience as an Asian American woman is different than of an Asian American male like Brandon, even with hate crimes, because I know that Asian American women get fetishized all the time, like from the beginning of time. Like it's ridiculous and it's so uncomfortable. And this guy actually that same guy made comments about like having a girl back in Cambodia, which is the sister, country of Vietnam where I'm from. And so like, it's so it's so uncomfortable. It's so uncomfortable. And like, I feel like that's also a type of like microaggression that people don't really speak about. And I'm glad that it's getting like, there's light being shed on it right now too.
Yeah, Lauren, adding on to your point, that's one of the things that just makes my blood boil. Like the fetishizing of Asian women. Like seriously, yeah, we're apparently seen as submissive, a good housewife who cooks for you, who's poised, graceful, listens to you, obeys to you. No, we're more than that. That is such a gross generalization about Asian women. Like we're badass and we're hella strong. So I said that. So yeah.
Yeah. Jumping off of that point, actually, I remember seeing on Instagram this post by Bart Kwan, and this was right after, I believe, the incident with the elderly Asian grandma in San Francisco, where she actually fought back against like one of her attackers, right? And like she fought back, and essentially what Bart Kwan said during like his video was that we, as people who are kind of like being targeted, we should kind of stand up for ourselves and like actually like fight back, in self-defense, of course, right? And then like if that incident ever goes to court, then we should have lawyers that are defending us, saying that it's in self-defense, right? Because a lot of the times, even though like you can say like be the bigger person and like just ignore them, sometimes it's more effective. Bart Kwan essentially says that sometimes it's more effective to actually like immediately address the issue and just send back immediate repercussions to show that their actions are not okay and that it's just not something that they should be doing. And so essentially what his message was that like we should be defending ourselves, and that not necessarily violence is the answer, but like we should be standing up for ourselves and sending back like immediate consequences. So pretty much I'm just wondering like what's your opinion on that message?
That's a really good question, Boone. I think that you said that violence isn't the answer, but I think sometimes violence is needed almost. Like I'm not saying like go punch someone
don't
you don't
go
like.
crazy. Yeah.
But also I think that relating back to like the Black Lives Matter movement, it's like they've been oppressed for so long. Like this is a historical issue that's been like through the centuries, right? Since like the beginning of America. And so like I think a lot of the violence and like the riotings that come from the Black Lives Matter movement like is called for because they've been oppressed for so long and no one's been listening to them. So I think that in some sense, it's like violence is not the answer, but violence can be the last kind of like alternative, I guess. That makes sense.
Yeah, I agree.
I don't know which.
Yeah, I agree. Like when people like during the Black Lives movement from George Floyd's death and stuff like that, when when it happened last year, people were looting and stuff like that. I know that a lot of people didn't understand it, but like it is like it is the kind of like a last resort. Like nobody's listening to them, so like you gotta have your voice be heard. And like sometimes, you know, making a big like gesture like that kind of like gets people's attention. And so it's like, hey, I mean, they've tried peaceful protesting, they've done lobby, they've done so many things, and like nobody's listening to them. So like, hello, like same thing here. Like with what Bart Kwan is saying, like fight back. I feel like for Asian Americans, it's harder just because like of the minority myth. We're just told like, hey, you know, you should just sit down, be a good citizen, just like we said that you were. Like we put you as the model minority, so start acting like it. And that's kind of like their way to control us. And so, yeah, I think it's a really interesting comment part one.
Yeah, so going off what story Brandon was describing, I think what happened was, if you guys saw that video clip, that man, he's a white man, he was on a stretcher because she was defending herself, right? That was the outcome of that situation. However, she just received an ice pack, and I was like, that's totally fair, not. So that just shows, even if we do defend ourselves, I'm not saying that we shouldn't, like, the media is just going to twist it to the point of corruption and putting that white supremacy saturation all over it. So that's one of the concerns from that situation.
I also think that, like, when the elderly grandma, like, fought back, I feel like it was very shocking to her attacker, because if you think about it, like, if you're, like, say you're a predator, right, and suddenly your prey starts fighting back, right, like, you don't expect it, right? And I think it's something that he'll definitely remember for, like, probably the rest of his life, honestly. And so I think, especially, right, people view Asian women, right? They fetishize them, and they view them as, like, obedient housewives. But when you suddenly, like, fight back and break that model minority, like, myth, right, then it's very shocking, yeah, and it leaves a impression on others.
Yeah, no, I think it is really shocking for people to see Asian women especially fight back, because, like, we're not seen as violent people, but, like, if you think about it, a lot of Asian women are the backbones. I'm not saying all, I'm not generalizing, I'm just saying, like, for what I've seen in my family, in my friends' families and stuff, like, Asian women are the backbone of the family. Like, my mom, like, sometimes she works overtime, she'll still come home and make dinner and stuff and, like, care for me and my siblings. Like, she does a lot. Not that my dad doesn't do anything, but, like, my mom does a lot. And, like, I don't know, I think it's interesting that they just kind of dilute us down to just objects. But with the rise of, like, Asian culture being popularized, like, what do y'all think about that? And then, like, these Asian hate crimes also, like, rising, like, yeah, what do y'all think?
So, boba milk tea, it's so good. And then they like the K-pop, they like the BTS, they like the sushi, they like our Asian food, they like our culture. But once people start talking about Asian hate crimes and once people are aware of it, they stay silent. If it only benefits them, that's what they care about. But if it doesn't benefit them and it has nothing to do with their race or their group, nothing. So what do you guys think about that?
I think there's a lot to that. Like, I totally agree with you, what you're talking about, Lexi, where it's like, you enjoy our food, you enjoy our pho, and yet there's, like, no, like, support when it comes to these topics. And I think, like, being, like, an education major, my only hope is that, like, the future students, because this is a mindset, right? This is a mindset that we're conditioned to believe because society has conditioned us to fit into the system. And so then, like, for me, like, I'm just thinking of, like, the future students and the future, like, citizens who'll, like, be able to change their mindset or, like, be aware of these things. Because even though, like, we have social media, which is, like, great in promoting change, it's not enough. Like, it's not enough yet.
I agree, and I hope that, like, people who see these patterns, like, with, like, people, like, just kind of gaining off of our culture or enjoying our culture, but then, like, staying silent about our crimes, also sees that pattern in, like, the Black community, where, like, people use their culture, they enjoy it, but then, like, the second that, like, Black issues come up, they're just completely silent, or they, like, don't care, which is also ridiculous. There's a lot of parallels between both cultures. But what I'm curious about is with the popularization of K-pop, Asian men are being a lot, like very fetishized as well. Like I'd say women have been like throughout like time, and like Asian men would often be like the last like resort type of thing. Like a lot of people who of like other races wouldn't like give Asian men a chance. Like there's like research behind it if you look it up. But like now with like K-pop, K-drama, anime, like I see a lot of fetishization of like Asian men on like TikTok and Instagram. Like Brandon, how do you feel about that?
I guess compared to when I was growing up, right, the traditional male model of like masculinity, at least in America, is like big, tall, strong, right? And you have to like be confident and all those things. But with the rise of like hip-hop idol popularity, it came to show that like there are different types of men, right? And they're still men, right? And they have and they can be different from the traditional model of like big, tall, and strong, right? And instead we have these K-pop idols who are more feminine, but they're still like men, right? And so it shows us a different kind of avenue that, yeah, we're different, and you know, not all of us are like tall, big, and strong, but we're still men, right? We're just different. So that's just my thoughts on it.
Yeah, adding on to what you said, Brandon, about that, I think one of the reasons why they fetishize K-pop men in particular is because you notice in Korea and Asia, they have paler skin. They want to look more European, but over here, we want to get more tanning. We want to look more foreign, as they say.
Kind of, I guess, going back to the Asian hate crimes, I guess there's some audience questions that were taken on our Instagram at VSAUWB. These two are kind of related. So like, what is a possible way for us to continue this conversation on AAPI hate crimes to those who may still have questions or those who may remain silent? And also, what can we do better to promote allyship between Asian Americans?
Yeah, so for the second question about how we can promote better allyship between Asian Americans, there is a divide, right? There's a divide between your traditional East Asians and your Southeast Asians, right? Because, yeah, right, with East Asians, like their skin is typically lighter and they want to be more like, they want to look more like European because that's like the beauty standard. The beauty standard is the same in Southeast Asians, but typically Southeast Asian skin tends to be darker, which is part of the reason why there may be a split and a divide, right? East Asians may look down a little bit on Southeast Asians, but to promote better allyship, I would say, I mean, the best way is to just understand each other more, right? Like the more experience you have with other people, the more times you're put in more diverse situations, you come to understand each other a lot better, and then you start to feel like you're more of the same person rather than some stranger that you've met on the street.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I totally agree with that, Brandon. I think it starts with what we're taught in school, because you guys have probably experienced in our American history classes, they literally most of the time praise white political figures throughout history, you know, in America. And if we really change that, and if we start to bring to light other cultures, that's called American history. It's not called white history. And so it starts from there, because you guys have probably heard that racism, you're not born with it, you're taught with it. And so if we teach kids starting at a young age what we represent, which is equality and being united and coming together, I think that would create such a big, positive, drastic movement to America. So I feel like that would be one of the positive changes that we would bring.
Yeah, I agree totally. And going off Brandon's point, like not even just like Southeast Asians and like East Asians, like South Asians are always not included in this conversation. Like, have you ever, I'm sure y'all have probably heard this like personally, like have you ever heard someone be like, oh, like India? And then they're like, that's not an Asian country. It's literally in Asia. Like, South Asians never are included in this conversation, but like they face the same discrimination. And like, especially like, I know there's a lot of colorism in their culture, and like a lot of like anti-blackness as well too. And so they face like a lot of like different problems because they're brown people. Like, yeah, a lot of them, not all, but like a lot of them have brown skin, and so they sometimes are like they're put in the group where it's like brown indigenous people of color, because yeah, they don't get as much privilege as us because we might be a little bit lighter, which is like really messed up. It's all connected. It's all connected.
Yes.
It's a whole system, I'm telling you.
It really is. It really is. And I agree with all y'all's points, because like race itself is like a social construct. Like it's like there's an analogy where it's like there are a bunch of moths, right? And if you look at it, like there are different colored lanterns, and when the moths go to the different lanterns, light shines on them and they become a different color. So they're seen in a different perspective. They come with different like prejudice. We have different prejudice towards a different colored moth. And that's kind of like what technically we're all humans, right? So like, even going back to Brandon's point, like even though we're different in some ways, in a different light, if we have that conversation, if we sit down, be empathetic, or just take the time to understand one another and have those conversations, I think that's the beginning of how all of this changes. Yeah.
Yeah, and like, okay, this might be a side track kind of thing, but like, Trey, you can edit this out if you really want to. But what I saw something that was like really interesting, I thought, because they said that like going off of your empathy thing, like having like I guess the biggest problem is trying to have people understand, like kind of like put themselves in the shoes of others and like trying to understand like how they may feel. Like a lot of the time when I see like people like being like, oh no, like Black people aren't like they don't face police brutality, like no, they do, and like it's really bad too. And like but like it's because they don't understand. They're not Black men and women and like non-binary people. They're just like, they're another race, and so they would never understand what it's like to live as a Black person. And like the thing I saw on TikTok actually was that a lot of people who identify as like 2 or more minority groups have like I guess like a better understanding of others. They're more easily empathetic towards people. So like, I'm not saying that this is like everyone, this doesn't apply to everyone. It's just like a type of theory that I like saw. And it was like that, like let's say a straight white male, so they don't belong in like any like minority groups, versus like an Asian American woman. They are Asian, that's a minority group. They're women, that's a minority group. And so Asian American women are probably more easily empathetic towards Black people and what they're going through right now than like a white cis male, right? Or like even if you switch it up and it's like an Asian American male and like I don't know, like a Hispanic trans man, trans person, and Hispanic, that's minority, 2 minority groups, and then like an Asian male, like an Asian male is less likely to be empathetic towards the situation, which I think is really interesting. But again, it's not everyone. Disclaimer, it's not everyone. It's just a theory. Please don't attack me. I just thought it was interesting to share. Yeah.
But going off of what Lauren said, the name of the game is empathy, right? Personally, I had never even heard of empathy up until middle school, I believe, right? That was like the first time where empathy was introduced in the classroom. And I think that was a pivotal part of my education and my general life, because, I think it was freshman year of high school, empathy. I learned about empathy and equity, right? The difference between equality and equity, right? Because equality is giving everyone the same thing, but equity is giving everyone, or giving people different things so that everyone is on the same level. And so I think that's really important because it's just the sooner you introduce these concepts to people, like the faster you can change their mindsets. Because right now, like obviously we have the older generation with more of a traditional fixed mindset. But I know in education, the curriculum is slowly introducing more open-minded trains of thought to just have it so that our students are more capable, empathetic, and just in general more understanding. I know Mindy is majoring in education, so if you have any more to add on that, please do.
I have so much to add on that. There's so much I could say, but so little time. Yeah, you're totally right, Boone. I think that empathy is something that, and empathy, understanding others, being taught in a classroom with people that don't look like you is something that kids can learn at a very young age. Like there's a video that I watched in one of my education classes, and the kids are like kindergartners. And like they learn how to share, they learn how to like work together as a team, how to solve problems. Like these are things that can be implemented early on. And I think Lexi mentioned about how like our history books are like very Eurocentric, right? The curriculum is very Eurocentric. But one of the, I'm gonna go off, but one of the things we learned is culturally relevant like pedagogies where they help students like explore their own identities and like explore who they are and how their position in the world affects how they view the world. And so then these things are, I think, really pivotal to changing the course of the future. Yeah. If anyone wants to talk to me more about that, I can go off all day.
Yeah, it all starts with empathy, and awareness. Like the earlier they're aware and empathetic, the easier it is for them to understand what it's like to be in someone else's shoes. And like I see that like even today, I'm like a youth group leader, and so I have like I follow a lot of my kids on Instagram, and like their thought process, like stuff they're posting, I'm like, oh my gosh, like me at 14 would never. Like I was just about like One Direction, you know, like I only care about that stuff.
Same.
Right? Like,
same.
Yeah. Like with the rise of social media, like sure, there are a lot of negatives, right? But like also there are things like this that like are kind of helping them be aware, kind of educating them. Obviously there's like fake news and stuff too, but they're very aware and they're very intelligent and educated about these topics, and like that does give me a lot of hope for the future.
Just a sidetrack, like I know that this might be too off topic, but I know that a lot of our experience like growing up too, like has there been a moment in your like experience, like even in education or out of education, where you found this awareness, where you are aware that there is a difference, or where you were that you are a minority?
Yeah, definitely. In my experience, in my elementary school, middle school, and high school, it was predominantly white. And so, yeah, I know. And I was probably the only Asian kid in my English or math or history classes, or there was 2 other Asians. And it just felt like my mom actually made this a tradition every year for me to wear my AAPI and pass on my Lexi for that, you know, because she's like, Lexi, you shouldn't hide from your culture. You should be proud of it. And so whenever I would pass out, they're like, what's this? And I'm like, I have to explain the whole spiel to them and like, what do you do with your families and whatnot? And then some of them are really interested, you know, in that and the celebration itself. But some of them are kind of like, okay, I remember this. In 7th grade, this one kid was like, only the Chinese celebrate this. And I'm like, sir, not the only race. I literally popped off on him and he was like, huh, but it's called Chinese New Year. And I was like, dude, there are different names. The Japanese celebrate it. Even people who are not Asian celebrate it as well. And, you know, embrace that culture. So that was my experience.
Yeah, I had an interesting experience growing up. So in elementary school, I went to like a minorities like filled school. So there was just a lot of different like races and ethnicities in the school, and I was just like, whatever, I never really thought about anything because it's like you're a kid, right? You're like 7, like you're not gonna think about this stuff. And then I moved to middle school, and it was like a little bit more white, but I still had like Asian friends, Black friends, Hispanic, Latinx friends, whatever. And then I went to high school, and that was a white school. Like I would often be like like I felt like I was kind of alone. I know there were other Asian people around me, but like they were either like they didn't experience my like the culture as I did, because I feel like I think I was the only one with like immigrant Asian parents. And so I feel like that's also a very different experience to like if you're like a third generation Asian person, or if you are like one of your parents is of a different race or something like that. Like nothing wrong with that. It's just like our experiences are different. And so I didn't really feel like I had someone to relate to. So I found myself assimilating to white culture a lot and trying to feel accepted. But I didn't realize this until I graduated and like realize how toxic it was, because there would be so many like different like backhanded compliments or like microaggressions that I would face, not even just from like white people, but like people of other races as well. And it's like that's when I was like aware. Like I knew things were happening, but I never really like I was very in with like in touch, like under like yeah, with like the BLM movement, and like I was like, yeah, like that's really like messed up and stuff like that. But like I never really thought about it being myself, like an Asian person, And like after I graduated, I was like, oh, okay, I see it now. So I guess that's kind of like my pivoting point. Yeah.
Yeah, similar to Lauren, like there weren't any really like big events during like elementary, middle school, or high school for me where like I was like, oh, I'm different, right? For me, it was more like everything was very well, there were like slight microaggressions, right? And then like everything was very subtle, right? It would just be like people saying like, oh, you're good at math, right? But me, like I was like, I mean, I am good at math, but I didn't realize that they were saying you're good at math because you're Asian. Or at least in elementary, right? I'm not good at math now, but yeah, they're like, oh, you're good at math. Oh, you're smart. And like it definitely didn't help when like in the 2nd grade I got glasses, which made me seem more like a nerd and more smart. When in reality, I was just like up late, either playing games, like every other kid, or I was just like reading in the dark with the lights turned off, which is very bad. Please don't do that. Your eyes will thank you. But yeah, for me, like it was all very subtle, and I never really like realized it until afterwards. So like definitely after like I graduated, well not graduated, but after I was promoted from middle school, and then after high school graduation as well, I started like looking back and realizing that yeah, these were microaggressions, and like yeah, these were stereotypical and generalizations that people made about me.
Yeah, thanks for sharing. I really resonate with like your stories, and I think the whole stereotypical like smart Asian, like hardworking, submissive, all those things like are so true, and especially like even in like movies and things, like the things we grew up watching. Lexi, do you want to comment more on your?
Oh gosh, it makes me that's one of the things that just gets me like I don't want to punch somebody, but I'll just punch a wall, because that's how angry I am about all these like microaggressions and stereotypes. Like, have you guys seen that movie 16 Candles with Molly Ringwald? It's a John Hughes movie from the 80s. No? So there is this Asian character, Minnie knows. His name is Long Duck Dong, and that is so, yeah. See, Lauren did the hand thing. Yeah, that is so stereotypical and racist. And he was speaking English in a really thick Asian accent, but he was making a lot of microaggressions about himself. And that caused a lot of controversy I think a month after the movie came out. And that's probably one of the movies in Hollywood where I was like, I mean, I love the movie. We love the 80s. We love the vibe. But like that itself was just so disappointing. And that just made me so angry.
You want to know what really bothers me? You know, there are like these stereotypes of like Asians and stuff, right? But like sometimes they're not that the stereotypes are true, but like that's somebody's personality. And so now you make them feel bad that they're smart, that they're good at math, that they don't speak up. Like, you know, like people are shy. Like, you know, we're a whole race. Like we're not just like one thing. So like there are going to be people who do kind of fit in within that category, and then there's going to be people who don't. And like I found myself while I was like kind of growing up, like I'd switch in between it. So I play into it sometimes, but then I feel super guilty about it. And so then I would like try to make myself super different, and like I'm not like the other girls, but it's like I'm not like the other Asians, you know. And so like it's so embarrassing, you know. But it's like y'all are doing this, like people are feeling bad for being themselves. Like it's more than just like, you know, a microaggression, it's racist or whatever. It's more like you're making people feel bad about being themselves, not just their race, but like down to their personality, down to who they really are. And I think it's just ridiculous.
I totally, yeah, I agree. That bothers me so much too, Lauren, because right, like as a human, like you should want to be who you are, right? And so then you should also give the space for other people to be who they are. Yeah, and it's almost like what you're mentioning about how you're trying to be like not as white or like not as Asian. That's like code switching, right? Like you're switching your whole personality, you're switching your like identity for different spaces. And yeah, that's just something that a lot of people have to like deal with or be conscious of.
Adding on to that, I don't know if you guys saw this TikTok video of this guy was filming a group of elderly Asians walking out in San Francisco, but they were covered from head to toe because they were like, oh, if somebody out there sees that we're Asian, they're gonna jump on us. Who knows what, says racial slurs, assaults them physically. And so it's kind of sad that we have to cover up our culture, our race, just because of who we are, you know, just to protect ourselves. And going back to our talk about equality, I thought that's what America is built off on, but guess not for now, which is, you know, I'm kind of disappointed in America in that regard. So
I agree, Lexi. I think that America it's marketed as equality. Our parents came here or my parents did, they came over here for equality, for freedom, for justice, and yet underneath it are the systems of like capitalism, sexism, racism, like elitism. Like it just goes on, and everything else is built on top of that.
Yeah, it's just honestly, it's very disappointing because like I know that we are definitely not the only people who are facing it as a race. Like I know that there's even more than that. There's like homophobia, there's transphobia, there's the lot of phobias I cannot think of right now, but a lot of people are facing these things and it really sucks. But I guess the best thing we can do is have these conversations, start these conversations, make people aware of it. And yeah, I feel like that's like the most that we can do just like right now and just in general, especially with COVID. But yeah, and we also need to remember that like anti-Asian hate is also like connected with like a bunch of other stuff. Like it's intersectional. It's not just one black or white thing. There's a lot of gray. There's different shades of gray. And so if you are an Asian person watching this, remember that like, you know, there are other races that also need our help, and there's other minorities that need our support as well. And there's like no need to play the oppression Olympics here. We should all just support each other and band with each other to fight the one common enemy. Yeah, but yeah, Lexi, do you have anything else to say before we wrap this up?
Oh, I actually want to touch base on, I think it was, what's that guy's name? Aaron Robert Long or something? He was the guy that shot up those 3 salons of, and he killed, I think, 8 Asian women. And I think that was the event that really started this big spark of conversation about it. So I was just curious about what your guys' thoughts were on that incident.
I think that was a really devastating event that happened. And like for me personally, like I am like off social media. I don't watch the news a lot because I just get so overwhelmed with all that information. But like that tragedy just shows how like, I don't know, how apparent things are. And like, even with it being like promoted on social media and like things and people are aware of it, there's still this like, oh, but like, I don't know. I feel like there's still this like divide between people despite seeing how horrible it is. Yeah.
Yeah, with an event like that, you would think that people would be able to unify a bit more collectively. But I also think that one of the important things that, one of the important things that kind of came out of that event was that it showed more people that like the people who were shot and died weren't just like, you know, random women, right? They had families, they had children. I remember there was a GoFundMe or something for like one of the mothers who died, and she left behind like her 2 sons, and they were like all alone, right? And so I think the more people that this reaches, like they'll realize that like, these are real people. These are mothers, fathers, sisters. Like imagine if your wife, if your mom, if your sister were one of the ones killed, right? And I think that's an important train of thought that everyone should have.
Yeah, I think I actually cried reading that GoFundMe description. Yeah, but because like I don't know, it just reminds me like, you know, like I have a soft spot for my parents, and so like it's like dang, like just seeing that like that's somebody's mom, like that, like my mom, you know. But I think a lot of like people, especially Asian people, relate to like what I think his name was Eric. Eric was saying about his mom. Something like that. Sorry. I'm so sorry. But like, yeah, I can't remember on the top of my head, but yeah, that person's like description of his mom. And like, it sucks. And like, I hope the best for them. And yeah. But like when we're saying like humanizing these names, because I feel like there's been a lot of shootings lately, but like in general in America, like shootings like it's just so constant that like we kind of are desensitized to it, that like this is kind of just like a, hey, remember these are people, they're not just like, you know, names on like a screen. It's like somebody's like child or whatever, you know. But yeah, that's a whole nother issue. But yeah, I think that this shooting really kind of snapped people back to reality, like, hey, you know, this is happening, and it's happening because of our race and because of people fetishizing women and all that dumb stuff that they've been doing. So yeah, it's ridiculous.
Yeah, Lauren, I totally agree with what you're saying. And you guys probably saw the clip of the bald cop who was like, oh, he was just having a bad day. And I'm like, what? Sir, I want to, not actually slap you in the face because we don't provoke violence, but one of those, it just makes me angry because you wouldn't say that if that person wasn't white. Says a lot about America. So that's one of the things that's really disappointing. And another thing that you said, Lauren, about fetishizing, he allegedly had a porn addiction to watching Asian women. So he wanted to eliminate his like problem. So, you know, obviously wasn't the best way to approach it. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's disgusting. But yeah. Yeah, I guess just to wrap things up right now, we've been talking for like an hour.
Oh wow.
Yeah, no, it's an interesting topic, and there's so much more to say about it, and there's just so many different branches of like this problem that like comes together with another like problem from other people from other minorities. But yeah, unfortunately that's all the time we have for today, so thank you, Lexi, for joining us.
Yeah, you're welcome.
All right. If no one else has any other comments, thank you again, Lexi, for joining us and sharing your insights. It was great having you. That's going to wrap up today's podcast for AAPI hate crimes. If you all have any questions for our next podcast, please join us next week. We will also have a question segment there, so ask us questions and we'll answer them on next week's podcast. Thank you all. Bye-bye. Ooh, VSA hand sign. Honestly,
But
close enough.
I can't fit my face, whenever you guys do it.
Oh, that's true. Yeah. Wait, Lauren, do it the other way. Because I think you're flipped on my screen. Yeah. There we go.
Hi, everyone. We hope that you've been enjoying our podcast about the AAPI hate crimes. And we just like to bring this extra clip to bring attention to the event of John Huynh's murder. John Huynh was a Vietnamese American man who was visiting his friend at the Beardslee apartment complex 5 minutes away from UW Bothell when Ian Williams, a white male, flipped him off. John, having the reaction many of us would, confronted Williams, and Williams proceeded to stab him in the heart. John died at the scene. Us as VSAUWB Bothell would like to share our condolences to John's family and friends, and we would just like to say, like, hey, this is what we're afraid of. We're being targeted because of our race, and even when we stand up to people, they proceed with violence, and that is something that a lot of us are fearful of. And now, especially since this event happened so close to home for us, we just would like to tell everyone, hey, be careful out there and be empathetic, and don't be racist. Don't be racist. It's just not, nothing good. Nothing good comes out of it. So yeah.